Good morning. I'm Bruce Weber, Willem Quaker Dean of the Zicklin School of Business, and I'm pleased to welcome you to this episode of Zicklin Talks Business. Today, we will answer the question, what's going on in big-time college sports? This year's college football championship was won by the Ohio State University Buckeyes. Rivals joked that their team was the best money could buy, with over $2 million going out to players. Duke's 18-year-old basketball star Cooper Flagg is receiving more than $3 million this year. What's happened to the long-standing view that student athletes are pursuing an education and, if good enough, will cash in by going pro later? Can a top-notch high school athlete auction themselves off to the highest bidder? If you care about sports and you care about higher education, is any of this good? Larry Zicklin, graduate, class of 1957, will be discussing these questions with Marc Edelman and Marc Sulam. A little bit about our two Marcs. Marc Edelman is professor in Zicklin School's Law Department and was a 2023 Fulbright U.S. Scholar at the University of Canberra in Australia. He has more than 15 years of academic teaching experience. His scholarship focuses on competition and antitrust issues in the sports, gaming, statistical data, and education industries. He's published more than 70 law journal articles and testified before several government agencies. Marc has served as Baruch College's faculty athletic advisor to the NCAA, and he earned his undergraduate degree at the Wharton School, University of Pennsylvania, and a JD from the University of Michigan. Marc Sulam is an adjunct lecturer in finance in Zicklin's Burt Wasserman Department of Economics and Finance. He's a director of Vecto IQ Acquisition Corp. And a board member at Interstate Waste Services, a fast-growing and innovative waste collection and recycling firm. Earlier in his career, Marc was a seven-time first-team institutional investor, All-American Equity Research Analyst at Donaldson, Lufkin, and Jenrette, covering the environmental services and construction industries. He's a graduate of Georgetown University and a former member of Georgetown's Board of Regents. He serves on the Zicklin School's Dean's Council. There will be time near the end of this session this morning for questions from the audience, and you can submit them via Zoom's chat feature. Once again, our moderator is Larry Zicklin, who is the former CEO and chairman of Neuberger Berman and also teaches in our MBA and undergraduate honors program. With that, I hand it over to you, Larry.
Thank you very much, Bruce. Marc Edelman, when I heard that you had a Fulbright, I was thinking to myself, I've been reading about the Fulbrights now, and they seem to have run out of money so that the Fulbrights that are abroad are not getting any funding. So you're lucky you had it when you had it.
Absolutely.
Okay, just to put some order in what we're going to be talking about, I want to start before NIL, which we'll discuss, and the NCAA settlement. Prior to NIL, were athletes being paid? And if so, how? Marc Edelman, do you want to start on
that? Prior to 2021, the NCAA member schools had agreed to a rule called the principle of amateurism. Simply stated, that's just a wage-fixing arrangement where all of the member schools agreed that they were not going to financially compensate their athletes. And the member schools gave the NCAA power to ban any school that did. Now, with that said, there's always been a supply of college athletes who've wanted to earn an income. There's always been a demand at many top universities of sports to secure the best athletes. And from time to time, we know for certain that below the table, there have been payments made by schools to bring in athletes. One more point, if you go all the way back to the very beginning of college sports in 1852, as was written in a recent Supreme Court opinion, the very first competition was a rowing competition that was sponsored by a train company. And every single one of those athletes was not only paid a stipend, but also given free trips and unlimited alcohol. So there's always been, whether it be above or below board, to a certain extent, compensation flowing between the revenue generators and the revenue recipients of college sports.
Marc Sulam, have you heard about that at Georgetown prior to NIL?
Well, I'd like to think that we didn't pay athletes underneath the table, but we do know that we were competing, at least in basketball, against universities that were paying some athletes underneath the table.
Okay. All right. So let's move on to the great change that occurred when NIL was put into place. Marc Edelman, you want to start? What is NIL? When did it happen? What are the effects?
Okay, NIL literally stands for name, image, and likeness. That is, in other words, the right of publicity, the right of a famous person to sell the use of their name and likeness for commercial gain. Now, name, image, and likeness as a concept, as a legal protection, has existed since 1953, when the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit recognized that any famous individual had that right. Now, historically, college athletes were not able to take advantage of that right because the member schools all reached an agreement with one another to not allow athletes to endorse products for money. What happened in 2019 was the California State Legislature passed a bill that made it a violation of California law for colleges in the state to prevent athletes from endorsing products for money. And that was followed by more than a dozen other states passing similar bills. On June 30th of 2021, the NCAA member schools, recognizing that more than half the states in the country had passed bills or would soon pass bills to prevent their colleges from stopping athletes from endorsing products for money, dropped the rule in its entirety. And at that point, the NCAA said that college athletes may make money from endorsing products. And that was the birth of what name, image, and likeness was supposed to be. It certainly morphed into other things that are closer to pay for play. And I'm sure Marc Sulam will get into that. But the right for college athletes to make money endorsing products without NCAA or NCAA member school interference in concordance with the right of publicity is what NIL technically means.
Marc Sulam, you're involved with Georgetown. Can you talk about your position at Georgetown and what it entails? And I'm talking about the collective.
Sure. So what's taken place since that period of time is that universities have come to the realization that student athletes can get paid. And so what we have, I can only speak to at Georgetown, but many other universities, most other universities who play big time sports, principally basketball and football, have created what's considered to be collectives. And a collective is, for all intents and purposes, nothing more than a funnel where we collect money from interested parties. In our instance, it's who are interested in supporting the Georgetown basketball team.
You froze for a second. Were you about to say alums?
Alums, but it could be people who want to support the Georgetown basketball team, but don't necessarily have to be alums. And we then have contracts through what our collective is called Hoyas Rising, with the 13 members of the Georgetown basketball team. And they do something that we have them do certain projects or something for this money throughout the year. And they get paid to do that so that they are paid to play basketball for Georgetown.
And does every member of the team get paid?
In our instance, all 13 members are paid or are under contract, but it's different by the caliber of the player, how much he contributes, not by what he contributes in a given year, but they're under contract. So there's almost like a structure of the best players are getting paid more versus the players who are subs or reserves are getting paid less.
And how much might a college collect and pay out to players? Let's take basketball for a minute. I mean, you're a relatively small school next to Ohio State or Michigan or Alabama or whatever you tell me. How much might those big teams allocate to basketball?
Well, the numbers are fairly opaque, so the numbers really aren't disclosed. And one of the things that's transpired over the last 4 years since this has taken place is now the individual athletes, not only are they represented by their parents and their AAU coaches and their high school coaches, but they also have agents. And in many instances, the agents probably inflate how much money they're making. But some schools are rumored to be spending in excess of $5 million for basketball. Obviously, some of the smaller schools have much smaller budgets. In the Big East, we think that the range is somewhere, and Big East has 11 schools. We think the range is somewhere between $1 million at the low end and $8 million at the high end. But there are schools that probably are higher than the high end of the Big East.
Well, so that leads to a question, Marc Edelman. How does a $1 million school compete with an $8 million school on it? Let's say the average team is what, 13, 14, 15 players on a basketball team.
Mm-hmm.
How does a 1 million team compete with an $8 million team?
The exact same way that two schools would compete against each other in a system if there was no compensation at all. We've never had balance in college sports. I mean, if you just look at it, for example, even in the period of time when we presumed there was very little payments, we had 1 teams and we had 16 teams, and we would have first round of the NCAA tournament with 50, 60 point blowouts. Athletes will congregate in places where they want to go. Now, historically, when you haven't been able to compensate college athletes, the best athletes would congregate to where the best coaches were. The athletes would congregate to the places where have the best environment to be, the best weather. The athletes, we would hope, would congregate in what we thought would be the best academic institutions. Now, if anything, we might actually have more competitive balance if you look at scores along the way, because at least a school that doesn't have anything desirable for purposes of attendance, at least now could compensate an athlete and perhaps compete in that manner.
But I just would add, I don't think there's a direct correlation to how much you spend versus how good the team is. I mean, there's an example. There are small market teams in baseball where there is no salary cap that compete at times with the large market teams. It's not always the case. And I would hasten back just a couple of years ago in college basketball, where St. Peter's, where I have no direct knowledge, but my suspicion is St. Peter's does not have very large NIL, if at all, an NIL budget, who went to the Final Four. Now, they were considered to be a Cinderella team, but they upset a lot of teams that probably had much larger NIL budgets. I think it might be easier if you had more money to get what are considered to be higher recruited or what are perceived as higher recruited players. But that doesn't mean that just because you have the best recruits, they play as the best team. And some kids blossom later in life or play better as a team.
Mark and Larry, I think you both, as Mets fans, would remember Jeff Pearlman's famous 1993 book, The Worst Team Money Could Buy, the most expensive team in Major League Baseball, and also the worst record that year.
Yeah, but there are always anomalies. But over time, it seems to me, the money teams, the big market teams, win more often than the small market teams. But I don't have the proof of that at hand. You talked about academic interests a second ago, Mark. A friend of mine told me his grandson played college football, that he was devoting 6 hours a day to college football for practice and weight training and all the rest. And plus travel time for the away games. That doesn't seem to leave a lot of time for studying. How much time does major league, in effect, college football and basketball take? And what does that leave for the academics?
Well, Larry, it probably takes upwards of 50 hours a week. Now, I am very bullish on free markets for college athlete compensation. And a big part of why I've moved in that direction is whether paying the college athletes or not paying the college athletes, the system has already moved so far away from education. In Dean Weber's introduction, he mentioned Ohio State University. Ohio State University brings in $270 million per year from its athletic program. 170 million of that approximately comes from football alone. So the football team that plays a 14-game season brings in more revenue in a year than the Columbus Blue Jackets, the NHL team in the same city that plays an 81-game season. Now, the way that colleges maximize revenue is by having the athletes fly across the country, playing in midweek games that are nationally televised in exchange for huge media contracts. This was going on even before the athletes were getting paid. Now, I mean, different studies have said anywhere from 40, 45, 50 hours per week. The NCAA has tried to cap the mandatory numbers of practice, but there's optional practice, which isn't so optional that it succeeds that. There's times in the weight room. There's time studying the playbook. As have been told to me by many college athletes, but most recently Kane Coulter, who was the quarterback at Northwestern, who led the group to attempt to unionize. In many cases, college athletes are not even able to take courses in the majors of their preference, not only because of the demand and time of these majors, but there are athletes that never have certain blocks of time available to them to take certain courses based on the pure amount that they've been asked to devote to the sport, and in many cases, generating revenue for their sport.
Mark, if you happen to know, what percentage of the Georgetown basketball team over the years graduates?
I think it's a fair percentage of the student athletes graduate. Now, a couple of things. One, the students, it's become almost a 12-month-a-year commitment. So they come in for summer school. So they're taking classes throughout the summer. So they get classes done through the summer, so that therefore their schedules, both in the fall and the spring semesters, are smaller, or 3 classes rather than 5 classes. They do have extra time to finish their degrees. So I can only speak to Georgetown and where we make a commitment. I can't speak to other schools and what happens, particularly when kids get hurt and they're no longer playing sports. So we have historically made a commitment to getting the kids to graduate. Now, some of these kids don't really want to. I can't speak to. I'm using a generality here. Some of these kids don't really want to graduate. They really want to play sports. Most of these kids who are playing think they're going to play in the NBA, or again, we don't have a football program where kids are going to play in the NFL, but want to think they're going to play in the NFL.
Larry, if I could just add to that, and I'm not speaking about Georgetown. In fact, I'm affirmatively going to give you a different school. I'm going to speak about North Carolina because they got into a lot of trouble several years back.
I remember.
Sometimes even talking about graduation rates could be misleading. There are some schools where you have high graduation rates and the students truly get an education. There are some schools where you have low graduation rates and the students don't get an education. But there's this third group where they keep the graduation rates high, but the students are funneled into classes that do not have the rest of the student body. North Carolina was one of several schools that got into trouble for purportedly having what they called paper classes, which were almost guaranteed A's for submitting a paper. And even where the graduation rates are higher, I worry both from a have you developed skills to get a job perspective, and from the perspective, have you gained the social skills and the communication skills that are supposed to be developed in college, whether some of these athletes are even getting anything more than a piece of paper at the end of 4 or 5 years.
Just to go back to NIL for just a second, Mark, what services do NIL recipients, basketball players in your case, do for either the school or the contributors who contribute, $50,000, $100,000, whatever the number is?
Well, the student athletes aren't doing anything for those of us who are donating to the
What about the Ford dealership or the GM dealership
let's just to focus first on the collective. So we'll send the kids out to do a holiday party at one of the boys clubs in Washington, D.C. with a bunch of underprivileged students. We will do a meet and greet with a number of donors, but not necessarily for me as a donor to the collective, but for the entire student population. We'll send them out to do some sort of charitable event in the district, cleaning up some sort of park or something to do like that. Now, there's a whole separate topic or a whole separate opportunity where they can do or get hired by a local car dealer and be a spokesperson for that car dealer or restaurant chain or what have you. That's a different part of NIL compensation. We in the district, because Georgetown is in Washington, D.C., we have not been as successful getting those types of opportunities because we're not the only game in town. We've got the Washington Commanders, the Washington Capitals. They've got a lot of other athletes that the local car dealer can tap into versus Georgetown University.
Marc Edelman, just before we finish NIL, can you tell the story of Ed O'Bannon?
Sure. So Ed O'Bannon was a star basketball player at UCLA in the late 80s, early 90s, who went on to have a career playing with the New Jersey Nets. He retires from playing basketball, and one of his kids is playing at another friend's house, and they're playing a video game. And the kid keeps on saying, "Daddy, Daddy, I see you on the game." So Ed O'Bannon goes to pick up his son and said, "Show me the game." And lo and behold, his friend was playing as the UCLA team, and there was an avatar of a player wearing a jersey that had Ed O'Bannon's number that looked just like Ed O'Bannon, at least in avatar form, and performed similarly on the court to the way one would expect an Ed O'Bannon to perform. And Electronic Arts made this video game. And whereas they made similar video games involving NFL players and they paid the NFL players, and NBA players and paid the NBA players, the former college game, they paid the NCAA for the use of the NCAA marks. They never paid the athletes. Ed O'Bannon ended up filing an antitrust lawsuit in a federal district court in California that went to a judge by the name of Judge Wilkin, who's important only because Judge Wilkin has decided just about every one of these cases against the NCAA since then. And the crux of Ed O'Bannon's argument was that the form that college athletes had to sign when they went to school, which waived all rights to compensation for their likeness and assigned those over to their NCAA member school, because all athletes at all schools had to sign the same form, it amounted to an antitrust violation, a form of collusion that violated Section 1 of the Sherman Act. The O'Bannon case itself only led to very small changes, but it heralded in a series of subsequent antitrust cases, including one called Alston versus NCAA, which went all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. And the big takeaway from Alston and the other cases is that the Supreme Court unanimously held that the NCAA member schools, when they come together and pass rules, including those that limit compensation for college athletes, are subject to complying with federal antitrust laws. And thus, it has certainly led to an environment where a greater subset of NCAA rules that limit athlete compensation are undergoing legal scrutiny.
Okay. Marc, I just want to get one more thing on NIL, and then we're going to go on to the NCAA settlement and some other things I want to talk about. Can I assume that these contributions that are made under NIL are not tax deductible?
Oh, very good question. When these collectives were created, well, first of all, if you make a contribution to the university, as most people would know, that would be considered a tax deductible contribution. When certain collectives were created, they were created as charitable organizations. We took the case, we took the tack that ours was a for-profit entity. We used outside counsel who had experience and said that the IRS is never going to let this be a charitable organization. Those that took it as a charitable, those collectives that were created and took tax as a charitable donation, the IRS has ruled that that's incorrect. And they may have some tax consequences for that. So this is a check. Writing a check to our collective or any collective in the future is not a tax deduction, not a taxable, is a taxable, you cannot get a tax deduction.
I'm going to ask you one more question as a follow-up. There has been a lot of criticism about money going to athletic teams and not to the university, which obviously most universities need it. You once told me, this is going back 30 years or so, what happened as a result of Patrick Ewing being at Georgetown and the fact that you won the NCAA championship. What happened to the school, not the basketball team, the school as a result of that championship in terms of applications, in terms of donations, alumni relations?
So I can only give you in generalities. I don't have all the specifics, but we won the national championship in 1984. I might add that that's the year that I graduated. So we're considered the championship class. The Georgetown that I went to was a small regional school. Today, it's considered to be a global institution. The amount of applications probably has gone, we used to take in 6,000 applicants or so for 1,650 spots. Today, we take in something on the order of 20,000 applications for that same 1,650 slots. The number doubled, tripled, or quadrupled post our championship. We've gone from being a small school to a much larger organization, a much larger school. And I think a lot of that has to do with the notoriety driven by the basketball team. And our endowment, which was small, today is a $3+ billion endowment. It's not all because of Patrick Ewing. I don't mean to infer that, but he clearly enhanced the reputation of the school in the eyes of the outside world. And I'm not as familiar with Villanova, but Villanova's success on the basketball court in the last 5 or 7 years, I suspect, has had similar benefits to the school recently.
Okay, Marc Edelman, there's been an NCAA settlement. How did it come about? What problems does it solve or not solve?
So I spoke a little bit about O'Bannon and Alston. After Alston, there were 3 other cases lurking behind, each of which also went to the same judge, Judge Wilkin. These cases were all consolidated, and we could talk about them together for ease as the House case. Collectively,
I think you should also say the House is not the House of Representatives case. It's actually that's the plaintiff. It's just called the House. Some people get caught up. It's the House of Representatives case.
It's a swimmer by the name of Grant House, who isn't even representative of the class himself. It's an outlier. He's someone who doesn't even bring in revenue in any which way for the school he swims. But it was a class of college athletes had challenged a rule of the NCAA principle of amateurism that prevented colleges from directly paying their athletes. In essence, at this point, they're saying enough with the fiction, enough with trying to tie it into name, image, and likeness. We compete in a market to provide our services to colleges. And the colleges maintain a rule that say no school may directly pay their athletes. That's why this one-off of collectives was even created, to fulfill a market where there was a market void. For a while, people thought that there was no way that the NCAA would settle this lawsuit. But the parties got together and they have a proposed settlement, which is being described as the House, as in Grant House settlement. The settlement first pays a large sum of money to former college athletes who were denied the opportunity to license their name, image, and likeness or otherwise make money from the sport.
Excuse me a second. Where does that money come from?
That money comes from the colleges themselves, have put together a pool to pay it.
Thank you.
But leaving aside the past compensation, and that's really not controversial. It's not unusual you have a class action lawsuit and a settlement of an agreed amount paid of money. The more unique aspect of this is what is intended to be a forward-looking component to the settlement. And in essence, they propose to create a new series of rules to operate Division I college sports moving forward. One of them is a rule that would allow each member school, if it chooses, without there being a violation of the NCAA bylaws, to directly pay their college athletes a sum of money up to $20.5 million per year, which means any school could choose to pay nothing, could pay 20.5, or could pay anywhere in between. And it would be up to the schools to choose how to allocate any money should they choose to pay it. The second piece is that it would end collective payments to college athletes in the sense that the payments from collectives to the athletes would count towards the limit. Now, endorsing products for money, like doing a McDonald's commercial or a Gatorade commercial, would not. But compensation for play, whether it come from the school or a collective, would amount towards the limit. And there would also be limits that would be imposed upon roster sizes in different schools. Judge Wilkins had to review the settlement. On first review, she rejected it. Then she changed her mind and preliminarily approved it. On April 7th, Judge Wilkins is supposed to make a decision about whether to finally approve the settlement. And irrespective of what she does, we could expect an appeal of that to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. The settlement is controversial for many reasons, but I will just pick out one. The historic challenge under antitrust law had been that it violated the law when all of the colleges came together and fixed athlete compensation at zero, that it was a form of wage fixing. Now, what is attempted to be done here is all the colleges are coming together by way of settlement and fixing college athlete aggregate compensation at $20.5 million per year. Now, anyone will tell you $20.5 million sounds better than zero. It sounds more equitable. But if you fix something at zero, or if you fix something at a higher rate, either way, it seems to amount to a form of wage fixing. So the question exists as to whether these parties could reach this agreement with a new but heightened cap outside of there being collective bargaining, which would create an antitrust exemption. And that's going to be the issue for Judge Wilkins to decide on April 7th.
Marc Sulam, if this settlement is approved, what happens at Georgetown? A, to the collective, which I assume disappears, and B, what happens to the minor sports? You know, track and field and gymnastics and swimming and whatever you tell me.
Well, the good news is, since I'm the person who's been trying to raise money for the collective and asking people to make a non-charitable contribution to our collective, that, first of all, my job goes away, which would be I'd be very happy about. But those people who are going to be giving money for NIL is going to be giving money to the university, so you're going to get a tax deduction, and I'll be part of that, so that'll be a positive. Secondly, since we really don't have a football program that would get a portion of that 20.5, we don't have to worry about how we allocate our 20.5. But for all intents and purposes, most non Big Ten and SEC, those are two big conference schools, we don't make money in college athletics. And we have 31 sports that we have. So it's not for me to say, but I'm sure that at the university level, we have to decide whether we still want to be, or we still want to field teams in all of those sports. And I think that's going on throughout college sports or college athletics, whether all of these non-revenue producing sports will continue to be provided. And those are very hard decisions, because these are sports that they've been fielded for very long periods of time. There are plenty of alums that are loyal to the university, loyal to their sports, have donated a lot of money, and those are very difficult decisions. But that's what I think's going to be transpiring over a period of time.
Marc Edelman, have you seen a lot of colleges dispense with minor sports?
Not as of recently. The example of the point in time where we saw most dispensing of minor sports was after the passing of Title IX of the Equal Rights Amendments of 1972, which was once schools became required to provide college sports an equal proportion to interest of men and women, we did see a limited number of schools not doing what we wanted to see, which was expansion of female sporting opportunities, but getting into line by cutting certain male sports that were not revenue generating. We saw this with gymnastics. We saw this with wrestling. But again, even where that took place in response to the passing of Title IX, we didn't see massive exoduses of any existing programs. We just saw limited fine-tuning and limited cutting.
My sense is that the non-revenue producing sports, whether it be swimming and diving or gymnastics or field hockey, which have historically been feeders to our Olympic programs as almost a minor league for our Olympic programs, will see some pressure at schools as they attempt to figure out the economics of their athletic departments to adjust to paying the athletes this $20.5 million.
Larry, may I bring race into the conversation for a moment?
Please.
When we talk about these programs, if we look at the sports that generate the overwhelming share of the revenue in college sports, we're talking disproportionately football, men's, and women's basketball. And if you look at the athlete labor that have primarily provided the fruits of this tremendously lucrative enterprise, as compared to the college population overall, these are disproportionately Black men and women from first or second or third generation families or low-income families in the United States that are doing all of the work. Now, if you look at the sports that have most benefited from the system of not compensating college athletes, where some of the money that's made off the labor of the disproportionately Black and low-income college athletes in football and men's basketball, it definitely also provides for sports like squash and sports like fencing. Now, I know we want to send a squash team to the Olympics. I know we want to send a fencing team to the Olympics. I know it's probably valuable for some college in the country to have these type of sports. Now, these sports, not only do they not generate revenue, but some of them, and I'm thinking specifically fencing, are expensive. These are sports that are not taught in a public school system, which means the free spots to attend these schools playing these sports are disproportionately given to wealthy white people who've gone through the private school feeder system. And we can't ignore when people say we shouldn't compensate our revenue generating football and basketball players, or we should limit the compensation of our revenue generating football and basketball players to make sure to allocate some of the revenue over to our non-revenue squash and fencing players. It sounds a little bit like a reverse Robin Hood argument of we've got to take from the revenue producing low income population to pass it over to the non-revenue producing already high income population. And that just concerns me a little bit when you begin to put all of these pieces together.
You know, it's interesting to hear you say that, because what occurs to me after Marc Sulam was talking about tax deductions is what I'm seeing now, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is money coming from the public, going to athletes using this convoluted system of collectives, and is not tax deductible. And in the future, we're going to get money going from the public to the athletes in a tax deductible system, so that we're, in effect, the taxpayer is subsidizing this money going to the athletes that was going there before that was not tax deductible. I don't understand how that makes sense. Or am I missing something? Anybody want to address that?
I don't want to address that. That's what's going to take place. I mean,
So I used to give $100,000 to the collective, it was not tax deductible. Now I give $100,000 to the university. The money winds up in the same place, the athlete's hands, and now it's tax deductible. So government is in fact subsidizing it. Government means taxpayers.
Well, even now, Larry, if you were to give money to a university, say you give money to Ohio State University. I don't know why you would do that or I would do that, but let's say you do. And Ohio State University currently pays their head football coach over $10 million per year. One could argue that if you're paying that to the athletic department of Ohio State University, you already are making tax deductible funds that are being used to pay for those in the athletic department. It just is the coach and not the athlete. So, I mean, I think there are a lot of things here from a tax perspective that are questionable. If you make a donation to a university and they give you free seats to a sporting event for a long period of time, that was tax deductible as well. We partially closed that loophole, but my understanding is that hasn't been closed fully. So there's a lot of unusual and interesting tax things that are going on here. My colleague, Catherine Kiska, who teaches over at Clemson University, has published a lot on the area and could point to a lot of interesting loopholes when it comes to compensating college athletics.
Okay. Is it a given that under the new settlement that athletes will receive more money than they are receiving today?
No.
No. Mark, do you think the basketball players at Georgetown will get more if there's a settlement and you get $20.5 million?
well, first of all, we're not spending $20.5 million today, and
I understand that.
we won't spend $20.5 million. I mean, I don't like. I surely didn't come on this call to make definitive statements about Georgetown University, but I don't think we're going to be spending $20.5 million a year. I think the biggest challenge is going to be for schools that have basketball and football. And so if you had let's use Ohio State. I actually thought Ohio State spent the rumor was they spent $23 million last year in football. Well, so therefore this coming year, they can't spend as much as $23 million on their football team, let alone their basketball team. And they're going to have an issue, or they're going to have sponsorships outside of the money that they spend in-house.
Mark, can you stop there for a second? So the $20.5 million is what they get from the settlement, but could individual donors contribute over and above that?
No, I don't think that'll be the issue. I think the local car dealer may hire the quarterback and say, whoever the quarterback's going to be this year, I really don't know who that is, but let's assume the quarterback is Joe Smith, and Joe Smith is the spokesperson for Bob Jones's Ford dealership, and the running back is the spokesperson for Steve Jones's Buick dealership, and that's how they're going to get around spending more money than that. So the answer to your question is, I would suspect that compensation for players in general is likely going up, not going down.
And can we talk about what a student athlete might get today who's a really good athlete? What might a terrific high school quarterback or a terrific college quarterback who's in the portal get for moving from one school to another, or an excellent high school quarterback get for committing to college XYZ? What are those numbers? What are we talking about?
Well, I think again, the numbers are opaque, right? And so the numbers are being disclosed principally by their agents. So the agents want to get more quarterbacks as their clients going forward. But apparently the best quarterbacks are getting $3 to $5 million. But I guess the best example is Carson Beck, who was the quarterback for Georgia, said he was going to declare for the draft and instead decided to transfer to Miami. And if he was to be a first-round pick in the NFL draft, it would be worth a couple $1 million. And instead, he's going to stay in college for an extra year. That would be a pretty enticing deal. The rumor is the number one recruit in the country for basketball is a kid who I can't pronounce his last name, so I won't even try, is actually going to BYU. And his number is somewhere between $5 and $7 million. Now, again, these are opaque numbers. I don't know whether that's the number or not. Bruce mentioned that Cooper Flagg at Duke is making $3 million. Okay, that's all plausible in my mind. He's the best player in the country, so okay, that's fair.
Marc Edelman, as a result of this settlement, is it possible that the big conferences, let's use the Big Ten and the SEC, for example, might insist that their member teams spend a minimum amount of money on college football or college basketball?
I think it would be a reasonable thing for them to do. If we think about what conferences are, arguably none of the conferences in college sports have market power. There are at least 4 of them competing against each other. So conferences presumably could put in place rules without there being antitrust violations, whether it be maximum payments or minimum payments. It would make sense if we end up in a world with 3 or 4 major conferences. It is in the incentive of the conference for every school to be competitive. So the same way that Major League Baseball is presently asking the question, what do we do with the Oakland Athletics? Or what do we do with the Tampa Bay Rays? And wanting them to increase spending to be more competitive. It's reasonable that a conference such as the Big Ten could say, if you want to continue to be a part of our conference, you have to be actively taking a role to maintain strong performance in sports. They could put in place a minimum cap, at least to the extent that they don't have market power and we don't have an antitrust issue there.
I think they're doing that, Uncle Larry, with basketball and football. And the question, the question that's begged is, what do they do because of Title IX and how much goes to women's sports? But that's a different question.
Will the settlement make a provision for women's sports?
The settlement explicitly does not. It's one of the many reasons why people are objecting to the settlement, is that the position that both sides made was, we are going to agree to a salary cap at that. Right now, it's about $20.5 million collectively. And they're staying agnostic on the Title IX issue, leaving that to be handled elsewhere. One of the many interesting questions with respect to whether Title IX applies, we've just had a switch in presidential administrations. And I'll try to give this in the most politically agnostic way as I can. In the final weeks of the Biden administration, pretty much every agency started passing new regulations and new ways of looking at how certain statutes should be interpreted. In the first week of the Trump administration, they repealed everything that the Biden administration did in the final few weeks, as well as everything that the Biden administration did in the final 4 years, leaving pretty much all of the guidance from the administration's blank unless replaced. In the very final days of the Biden administration, the Department of Education had issued a guidance suggesting that money paid directly from the colleges should come under Title IX. And within 3 weeks of that being passed, the Trump administration Department of Education repealed that. So I think the mindset here is, who knows, and not to address an issue that remains an open issue. not only in the courts, but even in terms of how the administrative agencies would perceive the matter, depending upon the political party in power.
Marc Edelman, I just want to ask you one more question, because I know Gwen is about to cut in at some point. Marc, do you believe that in the years to come, we will see collective bargaining among college athletes?
Absolutely. And I just finished co-authoring a paper that's coming out with Fordham Law Review with Michael Carrier directly on that point. While it is our belief that a salary cap in college sports, whether that be a salary cap set at 0, set at $20 million, or set at $200 million, no matter what it would be, a cap would violate antitrust law. There is an exemption from antitrust law. The term is a mouthful. It's called the non-statutory labor exemption. Now, in plain English, what that means is any type of collective restraint on compensation is generally legal and generally fine if a union agrees to it. That's why we have a salary cap legally in football. That's why we have a salary cap legally in basketball. I think one of these days, the leadership of college sports is going to wake up and realize the only way they could legally limit compensation to college athletes is by stopping to fight the unionization, bargaining with them, and then driving a hard bargain. And therefore, I think it's in both sides' interest, the schools and the athletes, to unionize. That's why I think that's coming, Larry.
Thank you. Marc Sulam, you want to add anything to this?
I'll leave it to Marc's perspective.
Professor Webb.
All right, thank you.
Audience.
Thank you. As usual, we hate to interrupt the conversation, but we do have a few questions from the audience. Do universities even need to offer athletic scholarships to name, image, likeness earning athletes? And for example, would Georgetown be able to charge tuition to a player who's receiving a multi-million-dollar income from NIL and endorsements?
Well, I don't think they would be, well, I don't speak for Georgetown. I need to make sure I say that. But if they were charging tuition to somebody, irrespective of what they pay them, and somebody other school that they were competing against to try to get that student wasn't charging them tuition, then they would be at a disadvantage. So the answer to your question is, I don't think they would charge them tuition. That's part of the package. So it's NIL plus free school, room, board, and school.
Marc Edelman?
And, you know, the free schooling doesn't even cost them very much. Little secret that I'm sure that nobody else on this call today knows. Between 8:30 and 9:45 a.m. this morning, I was at Hunter College as a student taking a class on European history, simply because I enjoy it. And all of us on faculty at CUNY get free education if we choose to use it as one of our perks. One of the reasons why CUNY gives its faculty free education is it's a very low expense matter. If you already have a full classroom, throwing one more chair in the back or two more chairs in the back is not going to increase operating costs in any which way. So to the extent that you're taking these athletes, it's like a non-full plane and putting one more person on it. It is a very low and affordable benefit in addition to it being part of the package to play sports. So I land in the exact same place as Marc Sulam. A lot of things might change. I can never imagine this being one of them.
All right, I have another question here, and the question is about colleges that some make money on their programs, some don't make money on their programs. And the question is, what percentages of college break even or bring in positive revenue for their athletic programs? And if there are colleges that aren't breaking even or making positive revenue, what is the implications for them? And should they actually be restructuring their programs in some manner?
I could speak here because I've looked at the numbers very recently. There are many, many thousand colleges in this country. There are roughly 1,000 colleges that compete in NCAA college sports. But what we're talking about here is not the many thousands of colleges or even the 1,000 or so in the NCAA. What we're talking about is somewhere between 75 and 125 schools that bring in very meaningful revenues, that bring in roughly over $25 million per year, or the 51 schools that bring in over $50 million a year, or the 25 or so schools that bring in over $100 million per year. And those schools are able to make real money from their athletic programs. Some of them might look like they're not making real money through creative accounting, through overpaying certain employees like coaches, but we're dealing with somewhere in a ballpark of maybe anywhere from 75 to 125 schools that are really able to make money off college sports.
But I think the hard part to ascertain is even those schools that don't make money, is how much money comes in through donations,
Yes.
endowments, things of that nature, former student athletes who go on to do things and have a good feeling about the school, or also attract more applicants. So it's not a direct quid pro quo. I think there's an awful lot of schools, if you don't have a big time football program, it's highly unlikely that you don't make money on a direct, you don't make money in this athletics game.
It's what you quote Marc Edelman. You talked about things that are hard to measure.
Yeah, it's absolutely tough to measure. I think the best that we're kind of able to do, and Marc Sulam talked about the Patrick Ewing effect, the closest effort to measure any of this was an article that was published by a Harvard University economist in the late 80s. In the year following, Doug Flutie was a star quarterback at a different Catholic school at Boston College after a huge national television win against Miami. And they found the following year that applications went up so much that Boston College was able to take not only a larger class, but a class with a higher SAT score by over 100 points. And this article tries to monetize the effect. But Larry, I think you're right that even with the best attempts by economists to try to measure this, you're still making a lot of assumptions.
When?
All righty, Larry, we are closing in on the hour, so this is a question for you. We have a lot of Baruch students who are not college athletes, but they're finance majors, there's accounting majors, there's management majors. If some of those students are interested in a career in professional sports or even college sports, what advice would you give them?
My guess it's very difficult to get involved in college or professional sports, but if you're an expert in finance or accounting, that area, bless you. You can
It's a big business. Would you actually not encourage them to aim for that, or?
It's a big business. It's just like any other big business. If you're talented, you'll make your way. It's no different than joining an accounting firm. My son has a good friend. He went to Amherst. My son went to Amherst. This guy was a liberal arts major at Amherst, and he wound up as president of an NFL team. It's not the way he planned. He went from Amherst to Harvard Business School, majored in accounting, got a job in the accounting department of an NFL team, became president of the team after 20 years.
All right, so the dream is possible for an accounting major or
Absolutely.
finance major.
Absolutely.
All right, I think that the hour is at a close. I think we'll have to leave it at that. I want to thank you, Larry. Thank you, Marc Edelman. Thank you, Marc Sulam. Next month, our topic is private credit. And the key question is, are private credit firms disrupting traditional banking businesses? And our guests will be Ken Abbott from our law faculty and Hank D'Alessandro, Vice Chairman of North American Private Credit and Managing Director at Morgan Stanley. So join us on April 8th for private credit and traditional banking. And thank you all. Thank you, Larry. Thank you, Marc. Thank you, Marc.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mark.